We are live at SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. Today we have a very fun topic talking about the Boston 2024 bid. We've got two guests from the Boston Globe. First of all, we've got Joan Vennochi.
Vennochi.
Somewhat right. I'm probably butchering it, but
Vennochi.
Vennochi. All right, now we've got it right. And Joanna Weiss.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. So my hope is we could begin first by you each introducing yourselves to our audience and telling a little bit about how you got involved in writing about this particular topic and in general. We'll start, Joanna, with you.
Sure. I'm a columnist for the Globe, so I write about a range of political and cultural topics, and the Olympics has been a big one in Boston. Also in December, I co-moderated a live forum about the Olympics. The topic was, should Boston host the 2024 Olympics? This was shortly before the USOC chose Boston. The bid was just in place, and already we had, both protesters and gung-ho athletes in the crowd, so there's been controversy about this for a long time.
Fantastic. And Joan, how about yourself?
Well, I guess I'm what you'd call a veteran. I'm a columnist for the op-ed page like Joanna. Before I wrote for the op-ed page, I was a business columnist. I write a lot about politics, sports, and business. And not to date myself or anything, but back in the 90s, when another group of business people tried to bring the Olympics to Boston, I wrote about it back then on the business pages. I find it a very intriguing and interesting topic, and I've been writing about it again.
So obviously this is a topic that transcends sport because it has the potential for great impact, positive or negative, for the entire community and the state and beyond. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the upside could be here with this, and then we can also, of course, talk about some of the negatives in bringing the Olympics to Boston?
I would say the pitch from the organizers is that this becomes a de facto planning process, an urban planning process, where you can take a look at some of the needs that Boston has in terms of transportation and infrastructure and use the Olympics to light a fire under the public officials and try to get some legislation and some funding in place. Although they've been promising no public funds, it's a little bit of a mixed message. But the idea is how do you use the Olympics to better the city in the long run? The question from the opponents has been, how do you do that without taxpayers holding the bag in the end?
So for the most part, are folks on board with the idea that those are the types of projects that Boston needs to be engaged in right now? And then the question is whether or not this is the appropriate catalyst, or is it beyond that?
I think that's the problem. The Boston 2024 people have they won the bid, and I think they expected everyone to embrace the mission that Joanna just laid out. But besides the fact that we're supposed to accept that planning for the Olympics is the right thing to do when it comes to planning for Boston, they haven't really been clear about what the plans are, and there is still a lot of skepticism about the cost, and that's really been their big stumbling block. That plus the fact that they were just totally unprepared for the idea that people weren't going to embrace this and pick up a torch and run down to Boston Common and say, yes, we want it.
So Boston's a fairly unique political community, and I think a lot of folks naturally don't have a strong grasp of that. Can you outline a little bit about some of what makes Boston so unique? Because I think that's an important backdrop as to why we're even talking about this bid in this intersection of controversy versus upside.
Well, I think in Boston people are used to questioning. The proponents call that naysaying. I think it's just wanting to ask tough questions and get real answers from people. So we have that tradition. It really permeates every issue that comes up, particularly when it involves what could be a huge public expense, and that's really what's driving this right now. Plus just this question, is this what it takes to say that Boston is a great city? Do we need Olympics to say that we're world class? Some people say no.
There's also an historical resistance to using public money for sports venues. There was the owner of the Patriots at one point wanted to put a stadium in the city of Boston and was pretty much run out of town. So there's a tradition of guarding the public coffers against the incursion of sports stadiums and big sporting institutions.
So for those who are in favor, what are some of the, beyond it being a catalyst for change, are there other upsides? And you mentioned a bit about it being a way to showcase Boston on an international stage. what are some of the other upsides that you're hearing? And then we can, of course, get into some of the challenges that are presented by the bid as well.
I think from my perspective, the proponents have not done a really good job of selling the upsides beyond what the outlines of what Joanna and I have just kind of mentioned. It's supposed to be a planning device for the future. It's supposed to be a legacy thing. It's also supposed to be fun. It's also supposed to be this thing of, you know, like a civic pride, and we're all supposed to rally around it. But they got out of the, they just have not, I think, have not really made a good case.
Great.
Well, I think they're, for one thing, they have been spending a lot of money, and there's been a lot of attention paid to how much money the organizing committee is spending just on the PR rollout, which then creates a level of skepticism. And there's a lot of concern about transparency and whether, you know, this is sort of an extra civic institution. It serves a bit of a public function, but it's run by people who aren't elected. And there's a lot of natural skepticism, questioning. I think Joan's right, follows that historical tradition. It makes people wonder, okay, who's running the city, who's calling the shots? Is it our mayor, or is it these people who are self-appointed and are, you know, civic, you know, very wealthy people, civic leaders? I think they have good intentions, but there's a lot of question about who gets to call the shots for Boston.
Can I just throw in something about the politics, because I think it's a really important piece of it. When this thing started, we had a governor, Deval Patrick, happened to be a Democrat, and sort of formed this committee to look into the idea of an Olympics. They took the ball and ran with it, and they brought along a fairly new mayor, Marty Walsh, to be an advocate for it. I think that made a big difference before the USOC, that they had this group of people that seemed to be in charge and the mayor of the city of Boston on their side. Then comes November. Patrick's out. We have a new governor, Charlie Baker, who's a Republican. His platform is being, you know, fiscally prudent and all that. And it's like the political floor has shifted underneath this thing. And I'm not sure I'm sure the USOC didn't anticipate that. And I don't think the Boston 2024 people understood the significance of that.
No, and I think they didn't do a lot of grassroots engagement in that lead up. They did a lot of work talking to public officials, courting public officials, but they really didn't go out and engage on the neighborhood. Their line all along at that time was, well, you know, this is all sort of theoretical, nothing set in stone, so we shouldn't talk about where this venue or that venue is going to go because we really don't know for sure, so let's not even bother. I think also the USOC did not want a lot of public engagement leading up to that. I mean, they really steered the Boston committee into a little bit of a veil of secrecy, and that's kind of coming back to bite them now. People really mistrust what's going on. The old governor at one point, you know, Deval Patrick, who left office, signed on to lobby for the Olympics for $7,500 a day. He had to pull back and rescind that deal. But people looked at that again as kind of a cabal of well-connected people who were feeding each other, but maybe not benefiting the public. So
let's shift to some of the other areas of concern that folks have, and also if you could identify where the concern is coming from. Is it, you know, a vocal minority? Is it generally a representative group of folks from neighborhoods or from the universities? Where is some of that concern arriving out of?
Well, the polling has shown, I mean, I don't know that it's not a vocal minority. The polling has shown that they don't have a majority of people in Boston or outside of Boston who want an Olympics here, and they do not want taxpayer money spent on it. So that's what the polling has shown. When the Boston 2024 people came to the editorial board to meet with the editorial board, Joanna and I were both at that meeting. There was like this one anecdotal thing that really kind of struck at their lack of understanding about what it takes to go to a community. They've gone to Franklin Park to, you know, sort of tell them what what the Olympics would bring to them. Did not think or imagine that the people there had their own idea about what they would want. So as Joanna pointed out earlier, I mean, it's like this doing it backwards, not building the grassroots support, not knowing what people want, just sort of saying this is what we can do for you. And that attitude just has not sold well.
There's been some resistance to certain venues that I think surprised the Boston committee. They came in saying, oh, let's have beach volleyball on Boston Common. It's going to be great. And then the Friends of Boston Common, you know, the local civic group said, no, you're going to knock down trees or ruin the common. So some of those specific ideas that they had pitched then met with a whole lot of public resistance. And already Boston 2024 has been saying, oh, we don't need to do that. That, you know, that they're pulling back from some of the things that they had suggested to the USOC.
And so, by and large, what has to happen now for the tide to shift? If you were the Boston 2024 folk, what might you be doing in order to get that polling to change? Because you've identified that the PR doesn't seem to be having a whole lot of impact, and that there are a lot of reasons for concern that folks are articulating. What would you do if you were in their shoes at this point?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, their big problem still remains the money issue. They can say that no public money except for infrastructure and security. But infrastructure and security is a pretty big number. And what exactly do they mean by infrastructure? So they need to show some real solid numbers, for one. They have to show more of a opening, you know, a listening to what the community wants. And I personally think they need leadership with more credibility. I don't know. What do you think, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, I think some real transparency would be helpful. That, you know, they've resisted. They've said, well, we're a nonprofit, so we'll have to disclose our top, you know, salaries, but we don't have to disclose all of our donors. I mean, you know, they've been sort of following the letter of the law in terms of what they need to disclose about their operation. I think if they really, truly open things up, that might engender a little bit more trust. I think engaging in a little bit more of a, you know, right now the engagement has been, here's our presentation, isn't it fabulous? And they do have, I've seen the presentation they made to the USOC. It's inspiring and it looks beautiful and they have gorgeous renderings, and I think they thought that they could take that out to communities and show that and people would just fall in line. I think a little bit more back and forth engagement would be useful for them.
Right, and a lot has been made about the bad winter and what it showed about in the terms of the flaws about public transit. And I think that's really a big question, because they think that that helps their cause, that they can show that if they fix the transportation for the Olympics, that's what Boston needs. But they really haven't shown that what Boston needs is the same thing as what the Olympics want. And that is a big missing piece of the puzzle right now, I think.
And there's a concern about diversion of resources, right? You know, is what you need to do for the T to help the Olympic effort exactly what the T needs, and are you going to be diverting resources that would go to other things that Boston desperately needs? I mean, this is a city that's still coming out of a recession and has all the social problems and economic problems that cities have.
It sounds like an underlying theme under everything that you've talked about so far is a real distrust for the organizing committee from the general public. And so we know there's been a few steps in recent weeks, including the formation of a large board with some fairly high-profile figures such as Larry Bird, David Ortiz, and those folks. Any sense if that has had any impact one way or the other around that issue of trust and engagement?
I'll jump in and say I don't think it's done enough. I mean, people may love Larry Bird, they may certainly love David Ortiz, they have respect for Olympic athletes and all that, but these aren't people that necessarily, well, Larry Bird doesn't live here anymore. I'm not sure where Ortiz lives, but they're not part of the everyday fabric of the city. So that we know there are areas of expertise, but it's not necessarily a balance sheet. It's not necessarily making sure that public money is spent wisely. So I really think they need someone who can exude that kind of confidence and get that kind of credibility with the basic community.
As we wrap the conversation, any final thoughts from each of you, and then also ways that folks can follow you as we continue to follow this debate around the Olympics too?
And I think the Olympics is still an exciting idea to a lot of people when people talk about it in theory. And, you know, I've read about in other cities, there's, you know, in every city that hosts the Olympics, there is some resistance all the way through. There are groups that don't want it to happen. There are groups that serve, I think, very usefully as watchdogs. And in many cases, once things finally happen and the Olympics start moving in, people start getting caught up in the spirit and get excited. So I guess it's a way of saying that all is not lost for Boston 2024, but I think they really need to engage and show that transparency and build up public trust, or they're never going to get there.
Well,
Fantastic.
There's one really important thing they have to do, and that's win a referendum that they've pledged to pass. there's going to be a ballot question, which we don't know the wording yet, but will basically say, do we want an Olympics? Do we want a tax-funded Olympics? Something along those lines. So they have an election to win. They have a campaign to wage. And sometimes in the conventional wisdom is the one with the most money wins. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case with this. I think they're starting out at a deficit, and they really have to win the hearts and minds, and they've got a way to go on that.
And Joan, how can folks follow you if they want to continue to see your writing, and maybe you're on Twitter as well? What are the best ways to follow you?
Let's see. I'm on Twitter at Joan Vennochi, and just look for Joan Vennochi in the Boston Globe.
Fantastic.
You can find me. You can find me in the same places in the Boston Globe, bostonglobe.com, and I'm on Twitter at Joanna Weiss.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for a great conversation about this, and we may have to continue this conversation depending on where this all meanders around in the future months ahead.
Thank you.